Alright, so this is going to be kind of a quick overview and sort of what I've realized and what I've done. This is full disclosure, not mine. I'm working on this for a customer, but since I got it in my hands and I've messed with it some bit and shot it, I can say I'm actually kind of in love, and I'm trying to get one myself because this thing is actually really nice. So if you read the title, this is the GHK G17 Gen 3. This started out as a green gas, and now, as part of the work I was doing for my customer, was converting it to CO2. Now I know Simoon sells them pre-installed Glocks CO2. You just have to make sure you get the CO2 magazine separately. The CO2 model from Simoon does not come with the CO2 mag. It's kind of annoying, but I mean, I definitely recommend it. I always love CO2. As you can see, my previous build for my personal Glocks or other handguns have mostly been CO2 because they're reliable. Where I live, it gets cold, so CO2 really helps. But CO2 with this, even on green gas, still had a really great kick. It just wasn't as snappy. With the CO2, it's just, you know, I wish I could, you know, give it to you through the camera so you could try it out, but you just have to take my word for it. The kick is amazing. Not only that, the weight of it, even with the magazine out, is very close to real steel. So very, you know, with the magazine out with a real Glock, it's very top heavy, but even with the mag out, it feels really close to real steel. Unlike other airsoft Glocks, whether it be an actual aluminum slide or even sometimes the aftermarket steel slides, they still don't feel as heavy as a real slide, but this one really does feel pretty damn close to a real steel. Like I said, I installed the CO2 kit for him. It was actually pretty easy. I have to say, it wasn't so hard. Obviously, you know, you have to download this link and watch this YouTube video on it, and it's just like a slideshow, so you kind of have to, like, you know, interpret it as you do. But it was actually still very helpful, very easy. But let me get into some of the internals. So let me get this slide off real quick. There we go. So I'll go over the slide. Now, from what I can gather, the reason why it weighs so much is that this is all steel right here. This is all machined in. It's not in a drop-in blowback unit like other Glocks. This is literally part of the slide, and it's drilled out. And the nozzle here pretty much goes almost to the back end right here. Maybe about 2-3 millimeters from the plastic end cap or the slide back or whatever you want to call this, the plug. You have a wall that's maybe 2-3 millimeters thick, and then it's bored out for the nozzle. So you have a very big nozzle, which is why I also think you have a very good kick, and why these are very reliable and don't waste as much gas compared to other steel slide Glocks. Because the other aftermarket steel slides, you still have a drop-in pistol blowback unit and nozzle, so you have still a pistol-sized unit that's usually designed just for an aluminum or even plastic slide. But here you have almost I'd say it's close to an MP7 size nozzle in here. So you have a really huge nozzle, big expansion chamber for the blowback, which creates just amazing kick on top of the weight itself. And because you don't have a huge cutout here normally where you have a drop-in blowback unit, this is all still steel. So the only thing really is probably a couple ounces compared to real steel, because you don't need such a big chamber. You just need a chamber for the firing pin and firing pin return spring and the extractor and all that. This, you still have a lot of meat around the edges. I'll see if I can show you when I take it apart further, but you still got a lot of steel around the bore for the nozzle. So this is a very weighted slide. It's heavier than even aftermarket steel slides for like the SAI Blue / WE and TM Glocks. very heavy slide. Not only that, obviously outer barrel steel, the guide rod is steel, so there's a lot of steel in here. I think the only plastic in here is the nozzle, and then you have the back plate, and then you have the rubber O-ring. Everything else is metal. Pretty much steel. The only thing that's not steel, I think, is the inner barrel. Obviously that's going to be, I think this one's a stainless steel inner barrel that comes with the CO2 kit, but pretty much all steel. So you've got a lot of weight, and also more weight because I added this Rmr plate. This is a real Trijicon Rmr plate. Took some modification to work. I actually go over that just in case if anybody else is wondering. The Trijicon Rmr plate, the dovetail, the male side of the dovetail, has a slot in it, and that slot expands when you drive in these set screws. The slot, or the dovetail in the slide, is still wider than, I guess, a real steel Glock, so it wasn't able to expand enough to grab on, so I actually had to bore out these holes a little bit, so the set screw, I actually had to get a new set screw, could go all the way through and touch the slide. So basically it's clamping itself with the set screw and not expanding the dovetail. So there's that. But yeah, that fit in very snug. That's not going anywhere. Especially with the Loctite, it's not going anywhere. If it can hold up for real steel, it'll definitely hold up on this. But that's what I did. That's steel, so that adds more weight. There's a steel tritium front sight in there. So there's that. But yeah, that's a very, for the CO2, it's a very stiff. I can put the phone down for a second so I can just take it off without it shooting everywhere. But yeah, we'll take this apart. But yeah, so the CO2 comes with a lot stiffer recoil spring. A lot stiffer. Obviously not as stiff as real steel, but it's a lot stiffer than like 150% for a TM, VFC, or Elite Force style Glock. So let's see if I can get you to see. But yeah, you can see that the nozzle is big. Let's see if I can get that all the way out. There's a little bit of rust. I try to clean up as much as I can. It's just, I guess, the nature of steel slide. But yeah, so you can see the size of the nozzle. You still have a lot of meat around the nozzle of steel. So there's a lot of meat around there, so that adds a lot of the weight. Obviously, like I said, the bore for this nozzle is obviously a lot larger compared to, you know, real steel for just a firing pin and return spring, but there's still a lot more steel in this area compared to just an aftermarket steel slide for any of the other airsoft blocks. So that really helps with the weight. You can just feel it. It just wants to tip backwards a lot. Like it won't balance. You have to grip it back here and they'll be balanced. So there's a lot of weight. I mean, obviously this adds to it. For the lower, obviously it's no longer a hammer fired weapon. It's more a striker fired. So that's why they got away with keeping this nozzle a lot bigger and more meat back here, is because there's no hammer anymore. So basically, there's no buildup. If you can see, there's a firing pin, focus. Basically, pull the trigger, there's this wall, and you're basically literally pulling the trigger, which is forcing the pin to open the valve, and then the gun cycles and resets the firing pin. So if there's a lot less spring needed. So I haven't taken apart the rear because I haven't needed to. But the only spring here is the return spring for the trigger. There could be one more in there for a sear or something. I know there's a spring in here. Basically, all you're doing is pushing the firing pin. It's not spring tension or anything. It's literally, there's no hammer striking it. It's literally, there's like fulcrum point back here, and basically you're pushing the firing pin into the back of the magazine where the output valve is. So pretty ingenious. I'm sure it took a lot of engineering to get it to work reliably, but I like it. It does, with the CO2, create a very heavy trigger pull because you're pushing against the CO2 valve. That's, I guess, my only complaint. I know there's ways to lighten the trigger pull a bit, but no matter what, when you go to CO2, it's going to be heavier than green gas because you're pressing on a valve that's under way more pressure. The CO2 kit also came with this part right here, which is steel. I think it's more hardened steel than the original. This is just where everything recoils back into, so obviously they want to beef it up as long as the hop-up unit was beefed up for the CO2. But other than that, it's pretty much close to real steel. Obviously, no matter what the trigger hammer group or whatever you want to call this area back here now, it's going to be different because, you know, obviously the firing pin is in the lower, like on all gas pistols. The only difference now is the nozzle, there's no cutout for a hammer to fall. So it's a quite an interesting design. I love it. I'm gonna get this all put back together now, but yeah, here's the CO2 pop-up unit. It's darker, but it comes with the CO2 kit comes obviously with new nozzle, new recoil spring and guide rod, and new hop-up and inner. So the actual hop-up unit is heavier, so basically it even adds more weight to the top of the gun. But I love it. I can't wait to see if I can get one. But it just sounds nice going together. Let's see if I can get this one-handed. There we go. Yep. Let me see if I can lock this back one-handed. There we go. Stand up the mag. Looking through the camera. There we go. So no BBs, only dry firing. But yeah, you can just hear it. And even just the slide returning to battery, you can feel it pushing the gun. It wants the momentum, just wants to draw your hand forward. So I love it. Obviously the recoil is not as much as a real Glock. No shit. Maybe the 22 Glock, like the G44, I think it is, or the 45, the G45. Maybe. I haven't shot one of those personally, so I can't tell you, but it's obviously nowhere close to real steel recoil, but compared to airsoft, it really makes you, you know, adjust your grip. It really makes you think twice about your grip, like when you grip real steel. Like I know when I grip my airsoft pistol, you know, compared to real steel, I don't have to worry too much. Like I just draw and start shooting, and because I know the recoil is low. But with this, the recoil impulse, it's pretty hard. So it really makes you want to, you know, work on your recoil and your grip a little bit more than just a regular airsoft gun. Still, yet, like I said, nowhere close to real steel recoil, but enough to really make you think twice when you grip it, especially if you want to, you know, shoot fast, shoot accurately. But I'm just gonna grip it loose, just so it shows up in the video more how much the recoil is. So I'm gonna try to grip it loose. There we go. Now if I really grip it like I would real steel, the CO2 cartridge is probably running low. I've shot this mag a few times, so it's probably getting low. But even with steel slide and all this, it still has a very good gas efficiency. So that is the GHK G17 Gen 3 CO2. If I get my own, I'll obviously do a lot more videos on it, but I just wanted to put this video out here because this thing is just amazing.